Good evening, members. Welcome to the democracy meeting. Before we get to the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that we're not expecting the fire alarm sound this evening, but if it does, please remain seated and Mrs. Matthews will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Now to the agenda. Apologies for absence. Councillor English.
Diana Lewins. Councillor Diana Lewins.
Right. So you're substituting for Councillor Lewins, Marion Ring, and Councillor Garton. Substituting.
Yeah, I'm substituting for Councillor Ring. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. There are no urgent items on the agenda. Notification of visiting members, please. Can you approach the two chairs there and sit in one of them? Just say which.
Yeah, that sums it up really. Yeah, Councillor Harper's representative on Earth for 13 and 14. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's noted. Disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? None? Disclosures of lobbying. Any disclosures of lobbying, members? Councillor English.
I have been lobbied by the aforementioned Councillor Harper on item 13.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Perry.
Yes, I think I was technically lobbying. Obviously, I've discussed this with Councillor Harper at a group leaders meeting, so I'm not sure it's lobbying or not, but I'm aware of it all. So
I would suggest that's probably lobbying.
Yeah, I won't take a chance.
No, thank you. Consider whether any items should be taken in private, because there are possible disclosures of exempt information. There are no Part 2 items on the agenda tonight. Minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of January 2018. Have all members here read those minutes? And are there any comments on the minutes starting on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? And page 4? So I can sign those as a correct record. Thank you. Presentation of petitions. There are no petitions. Change of order of business. I wish to make a change to the order of business and move agenda item 15 up. So this is discussed first. Is that agreed by members? Okay. Right. That may have been an idea there, but right. The item 15 is the decommissioning of the Democracy Committee. And Sam Bailey will present this item and the recommendation on page 34 of the agenda. Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. I trust that you've all read your papers, so I'll keep it very brief. The proposal for the Council to decommission the Democracy Committee has been put forward by Councillor Harper. The functions of the Democracy Committee could quite easily be redistributed to other current standing committees of the Council, with minimal impact on the committees themselves. The areas relating to governance could be covered by the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, where these matters are more complex and require perhaps some further work than what you could carry out in a committee meeting. These could be carried out by a subcommittee of the Audit Committee if they wanted to sort of go into a bit more depth. For example, the work you did earlier on this year in outside bodies, quite easily covered in that way. If there are any concerns about workload for this committee due to the new responsibilities, then you could always call additional committee meetings if required. But to be honest, looking at the work programmes of both the committees, you could probably put them into the one committee and not have to adjust the number of meetings. Employment Committee could cover member training and development. This committee covered this element of Democracy Committee's terms of reference before the change to the committee system, so it would be logical for it to go back there. Urgency Committee could take on the role of acting as an appeal panel, as outlined in paragraph 1.5 of the report. However, this provision has never been used and is quite unlikely to be needed in the future. I'm happy to answer any questions from members resulting in the report or my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, it was a very speedy. What do members feel on this? Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. I just got a thought. When we moved to the committee system, we were told that there would be committees where all councillors could get involved. So therefore, I'm rather concerned we're actually thinking of decommissioning this one, where I think with other ways around it, we could make it go back to supposed to the general purposes, where it could obviously collect, take up all the odd bits. My concern is that the bigger the committees, the more remit you're going to have. Does that mean that that committee is going to be bigger? So you're going to have huge committees, membership? Because the concept of us was sold to go as a committee system was that more members would have the chance of being involved. So hence my concern that we're actually thinking of actually getting rid of one. Thank you, Sam.
In the report here, I'm not proposing we increase the membership of Audit Committee, but I understand your concern there that perhaps getting rid of one of the committees will reduce the number of members. However, at the moment, in terms of the current allocations, there is roughly 2 seats on committees for every member. It might drop down to 1.9 or something like that, but with the way that we allocate seats to committees, it would still give members an opportunity to sit on, roughly, on average, two committees each, essentially, just by the way we allocate seats. So getting rid of 9 seats overall wouldn't change that picture massively, so there'd still be lots of opportunity for members to get involved in the committees they want to. We've also got provisions in the Constitution we're not proposing to change, where any member can place any item in any committee, providing it's within its terms of reference, and visiting members can come and speak on those items as well, as we have tonight. So there's still plenty of opportunities for members to be involved in the committees and the decision-making process across the council.
Councillor English.
There are always arguments for and against particular constitutional issues, and I've personally felt at the start when we set up the committee system that the committee sizes were abnormally small, but that is a different issue. Back when we had a different committee system, and in some other councils they tend to be slightly bigger. But, that is an issue that we will probably look at some point, but it's not a reason for necessarily keeping a particular committee. And it has to be said that there has already been a reduction in the workload of this committee, potentially, at least, with the decision to move some of the outside body appointments back to the service committees. Rightly or wrongly, that is going to have an impact. So I think it's an issue that we should be looking at. I personally think there are arguments on both sides of the equations. What I would say, from a governance point of view, is that I think this should go forward to full council with a recommendation to actually make a decision one way or the other, because I don't think it's a good principle for committees to determine their own fate, shall we say. And I think all members of the council should have an opportunity to express a view on whether this committee should continue or not, or if it continues, in what shape or form it continues, rather than this committee taking a decision, which I don't think is really the right way of doing it. So I will support the recommendation, but at this point, because it is not the final decision, council will have to discuss this, will have to come to a view on whether this is the right thing to do or not, and that will give everyone the opportunity to have an input and to discuss it. And it may be that members decide otherwise, but I think it is full council that should make the decision.
Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up on Councillor English's last point, well, of course, my understanding is that this goes to full council anyway, irrespective of what we decide tonight, and full council might agree to overturn the recommendation that this committee makes. So that discussion will be had, whatever is agreed tonight. So in effect, taking what Councillor English has said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying we should just not make a decision tonight and just let full council establish what it thinks. Well, I think we should probably make recommendations to full council, because that's what we're being asked to do. I do agree, though, about the issue of the size of some of the committees, and particularly the free service committees, which aren't P&R, are only 9 members, and I think there's definitely an argument to increase them perhaps to 11 or even 13, but certainly to increase the membership, and that is precisely what this committee, from what I understand, and obviously I weren't around at the time, was set up to do. I think we are. Well, there's two things really. Firstly, it's kind of interesting. This has come on from Councillor Harper. I don't think has ever served on the Democracy Committee before, which is an interesting sort of way of going about things. But anyway, we're discussing this tonight. I think we're trying to crack a sledgehammer with nuts with a sledgehammer. Sorry, to get the right way round, if I'm totally honest. And I think rather than necessarily going through looking at the 9 functions of the committee, I think what I'd like to see, and again I speak as someone who's not sat on the Employment Committee, is I think the Employment Committee and Democracy Committee should be merged. That's my personal view on this, because I think their functions are they overlap a fair bit. I know only one of the functions here is determined to go across, but looking at the calendar of meetings, the Employment Committee obviously meets quite a lot, and the subcommittees do at around February, and then it's relatively quiet for the rest of the year thereafter. Obviously, with this committee, its workload kind of has peaks and troughs depending on whatever is brought to it. So I think I think that by putting those together, you can create, in effect, quite a good committee that will be able to discuss a lot of these matters, while leaving audit alone to do what it does at the moment. And it meets twice every 2 months, I think, and normally has a reasonably sort of sized work programme, not the busiest, but that seems to cope fine. So I'm not too sure, if I'm honest, that decommissioning is certainly the right answer, certainly the right phrase to use. I think perhaps we should be looking to reallocate the responsibilities of this committee and in my view, the Employment Committee would be the best committee to pair up with.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not such a straight. When I read the paper, I'm all for saving money, actually, and clearly the more committees you have, the more expensive it is in terms of staff effort and various cost implications. So on that point, I'm sympathetic with the proposal. But it's quite unusual, isn't it? Because you very rarely get turkeys voting for Christmas, do you? And this is a classic example of it sitting here. I agree entirely with Councillor English that it should be a full council decision. That seems to me the right approach. What it did trigger with me was that it's a bit, how should I put it, pick and mix here. We're looking at the Democracy Committee, but I would actually think it should be part of a bigger survey looking at all the committees. Because, I mean, I know even some of the service committees, there are issues with the size of the agenda and the number of meetings. I'm not pointing the finger at any particular one, and if you were going to go down this route, there might be an option to reduce the number of service committees, but have bigger committees, which would meet Councillor Hinder's very well-made point that the whole object of the committee system is to involve as many members as possible, and I understand that, and I can see where you're coming from. So I suppose what I'm really saying is I'm I'm sympathetic with the approach because I fully understand where you're coming from, but I think there's a bigger picture here that maybe we should be looking at, and we should perhaps be reviewing all the committees and decide whether the size is right and whether they are covering the right areas. So I suppose really what I'm saying, I'm slightly hedging my bets on this one. And I would like to see a bit more work done on it, I think, before I actually made a final decision. I fully understand where you're coming from, and it's very well presented, and it's a very good paper. I just think we need to do a bit more work before we make a final decision. That's really what I'm saying. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Atkins, I'm sorry, I should have actually asked you to speak, as you're the visiting member before everybody else. Please come and speak if you so wish on this point. Sorry, it's not this one. Okay, sorry. Councillor English.
I think Councillor Perry's point, in a way, was made by the previous speaker, Councillor Bolton, because I can understand why, looking at the meeting, if you looked at the meeting timetable, which he clearly has by way of doing research, you would think there was some merit in that discussion. But actually, the functions of the Employment Committee are very, very, apart from member training, are very, very different from this committee. And I'm not saying there couldn't be some reallocation, but it would be quite an interesting proposition. So I think that does tend to reinforce what Councillor Perry has said about the need for some possible further work. But clearly, when this is discussed by full council, if questions are raised and indicators brought forward of, shall we say, directions of further research as indicated, then that is something that could be taken up. I think it's far more important that the council get this reallocation, to use, I think it is a more appropriate term, right, than it is to get it done by a fixed date in the calendar. So it's far more important to actually get our constitutional structure correct than it is to get it done by a fixed date. However, having said that, we don't want it to drag on forever and a day. But clearly councillors are going to have different opinions on exactly how it should be done. So I think rather than trying to reinvent the wheel here, we should take this recommendation forward as a basis for debate at full council, because it's much easier to discuss something if you've got a proposal rather than a blank sheet of paper. But bearing in mind that is not the final decision, and members may well wish to change that there, ask for further action. So I'm going to propose the recommendation as it stands to go forward for council simply as a template for further discussion, because that's needed.
Can I just say one thing here? I mean, before we decommission a committee, no financial information has been brought forward by any officers before we decommission a committee. And I think that needs some consideration before any decision is taken on the way forward on this. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bolton.
If that's a motion for Councillor English, I'd like to propose an amendment to that, which is that we actually... Well, in that case, now it's been proposed and seconded. I'm still going to propose an amendment, Mr. Chairman, if I may, which is actually that we don't make this decision tonight, and what we go and we ask officers to, and this would probably fall in Mr. Bailey's lap, to do is to review the functions of all the committees, including the service committees, to see whether they are succeeding as they are, because since the committee system was set up 3 years ago, I don't think such a review has been able to take. And then for the officers to come back to this committee, because I think Council will need a steer from this committee before it makes a decision, as to any suggestions that they can make to match the balance of member participation, as raised by Councillor Hinder, also the financial aspect that was raised by Councillor English, and to have perhaps a full-scale review of the committees, not the committee system, but the committees, and then come back to this committee in the probably in the first meeting of the next year, with a recommendation that this committee can then decide on what he wants to recommend to full council. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Procedurally, though, that's not an amendment. That would be a new motion because you're changing it completely. But that's fine. We can deal with that. But no, that does make sense. I understand what you're saying there. But
Councillor Garton.
Mr. Chairman, in a way, I want to second that new motion then. Because I'm a conservative, a double conservative, one with a capital C, obviously, that's why I'm on this side of the room, but also one with a small c. Now, we are sitting here at the committee. We have a certain workload here. We don't feel surplus to requirements, exactly. So why are we actually talking about getting rid of this committee? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If there is an argument for amending the committee system in general and passing responsibilities between different committees, then certainly this would be the right committee to actually address that problem, being a democracy committee. And once we, as our group, come to some sort of conclusion whether we should shift responsibilities between committees or possibly even get rid of one or the other committee, possibly this committee, then we can go to the council, to full council, and make some recommendations. If we simply say, well, we don't think we are the good committee any longer, and do you want to get rid of us? I can just imagine the evening at full council where everybody will chip in and have one opinion or another, whether it's been qualified or not, if we don't have any background. So I certainly would like to second Councillor Bolton that we go back to the drawing board and actually have a look whether this committee has a purpose.
Thank you very much. Okay. Councillor Bolton's, because there was a motion that was put forward and it was seconded by Councillor Firma. Would you like to speak, Councillor Firma? You reserve your right to do so. Right. Yeah. Can we take a vote on the first, on Councillor English's?
Yeah.
Right. Are you okay with that? Those four, Councillor English, as on the papers, yeah, sorry, as on the papers. Yeah, would you mind clarifying that, please?
Yeah, no problem. So the first motion that's been put forward, so we'll take it first, is to put forward the recommendations as they are on the papers. So I'll refer you to page 34 of your agenda. So it's recommendations 1 to 6 have been proposed in the original motion, and that's what you're voting on now as a block, if that's okay, unless you want to take them one as a block. Okay.
First is because the two motions are direct negative images. They are, if one passes, the other.
Right. So can we take a vote on the first motion, please? Those four. 3. Those against. So that particular motion. Oh yes. Any abstentions? Yeah. One abstention. Sorry. So that motion is lost. So we go to Councillor Bolton's. Can you?
Okay. So the motion is that I don't really know whether this would be a deferral or what, but basically that the council review the functions and responsibilities of each of the council's committees and come back to the Democracy Committee with a review. The officers clearly aren't particularly happy with that, or would like. Do you want further detail, or?
Are you specifying Democracy Committee to look at it? Is that?
No. To carry out the review.
To carry out the review.
what I'm saying is that if possible, if officers are able to, is officers carry out a review into the functions and responsibilities of each committee and then report back to the Democracy Committee with its findings.
Just as another perspective, we can quite easily, as officers, do a review, but in terms of the steer from members, we don't know what they want to achieve from it. So it might be that you put an item on the work programme for the next meeting of this committee to sort of scope it, and then perhaps have a working group.
I've got an idea. I don't think we even need to do that. I think we can do that now. What we're really looking, based on the conversation that's been heard so far, is, and the purpose of this review is to look into the financial impact of the number of committees on the council, to look in, as Councillor Hinder said, about the member input into the committee system so that it achieves the aims when the committee system was set up, to look at all the areas of council responsibility, all the statutory duties it has and all the other areas which it participates in, such as economic development, which, as from the other item we'll see, doesn't sort of have a natural home, so to speak. That should be considered as part of this review. And I'd suggest to officers perhaps that they do a member workshop, that they do a survey of members as well, and officers too, as well. Is that helpful? Does that give you some ideas?
Yes, that's very helpful. Very large piece of work. Happy to carry it out, but it won't be something we can probably turn around for the next finished item for the next meeting. But it might be something we can do over the next over the summer, and it'll be something for the next municipal year for this committee.
I think that's wise and and it means that when the councillors of this committee and council does have a say, it will have a say based on all the facts in front of them. I think that's a good way forward.
I've got Councillor English first, Councillor Garton, and then Councillor Perry, if I may. Thank you.
I'll return to my point earlier. I think members and officers are now in agreement that if we are going to do such a major piece of work, and it is a major piece of work, I'm not against it, and certainly if it can look at the issue of the in my view, ridiculously small size of our committees, I'm not against doing it. I think there are benefits, but it is important to get it right and this not to be rushed like one or two other things that have been looked at in the council's history. I think we all know what I mean. And the outcome being an outcome that will stay in place for a number of years because there's a significant consensus behind it and is not always being fiddled around with if the electoral balance on the council shifts or something, is a desirable outcome. And so I think deliberate speed and as much inclusion and discussion as possible, because if we rush this, we're going to be doing it again and again, like a certain other review that I won't refer to at the moment. And with that caveat, I think that we can agree. And as I said, item 14 automatically falls as a result if this goes through.
But, I see this as part of a democracy committee's role is to review, and clearly these things should be coming back to us, which they haven't been. And anyway, that's my personal comment. But, Councillor Garton.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. May I just suggest that the workload of the individual committees is also being addressed in the review, i.e. a committee which only meets, say, once a year, that may be possibly appropriate to be merged with another committee which only meets once a year, if possible, so that we have more equal workloads on the committees, not that we have a top-heavy committee somewhere sitting there and some other little committees which are doing very little throughout the year.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. This is not in disagreement with what's been proposed. I think we need to make a distinction between the service committees and there are statutory committees like planning, licensing in particular. So we need to bear that in mind. But it's particularly the service committees, I think, we need to look at quite carefully, and particularly the size and the workload as well, and whether some of those could be merged. You know, we at the moment have got 4 service committees. Maybe we can come down to 3, but bigger. You know, that's the sort of I would like to see. You know, in the terms of reference, whatever we want to call it. I hope you understand what I'm getting at. And I agree with Councillor English that item 14 falls because it's tied in with all this. Thank you. That's all I really want to say. It's just building on what Councillor Borton's proposed.
Thank you very much. Any other? Can we take a vote on? Can you read out what was agreed there?
So the wording, from what I understand, is that the officers conduct a review into the functions and responsibilities of each council committee. I think that's the. I'm minded to, and I'm sort of looking round to see what other members think here, if we exclude regulatories in planning and licensing, because they are standalone to an extent and we can't mess with them. But, so if we perhaps put excluding the 2 regulatory committees at the end, is that acceptable to everyone? Yeah, is that better? Okay. So we're to review the functions and responsibilities of each committee, excluding the regulatory committees.
Angela, could you possibly read out that motion there, and then we can take a vote on that, so we're clear with what we're doing.
The officers conduct a review of all committees, excluding the regulatory committees, considering the financial impact and workloads of those committees. To my mind, it's about the governance and that members are included in the review and part of the work.
I'm sorry.
Just one sec, can we have that through the chair, please?
I'm sorry, the inclusion in the review was that, but the third point about doing the review was the finance and the workload, but also to maximise member involvement.
When we did the review, in the first place, when we identified the committee system, and we put a lot of work into that, I was a big part of that, so I've got fond memories of those meetings. We did set up a list of principles where we said, these are the things that we are measuring this against. If it's all right with you, I would rather do the review against those principles, which included value for money, it included member involvement, it was about maximising member involvement. I think it'd be better to go to those principles that we originally put in place when we said, right, we're moving to a committee system, this is what we want to achieve. I think it'd be a good idea for this committee to go, and have we achieved that 2 years in, or do we need to tweak things? You know, is there amendments we need to make because we're not achieving? What do you think? That to me would be clearer, and I'd have a nice clear, these 3 things I can look at.
Councillor Bourne.
The only question I have is, I wasn't around when the committee system was set up, so I've got no idea. I didn't realise until 10 seconds ago that there were a set of principles, let alone what they are, if I'm totally honest. So if somebody can let us know what they are, we can perhaps critique them now. But in principle, I think that what you said, Mr Woodhouse, makes sense on the proviso that those principles have included all the aspects of the debate that we have mentioned so far, basically.
I mean, Councillor English and Councillor Vizard were part of that working group, and one of the big pushes was about member involvement and value for money. They were the big things, because it was very much, we don't want this to cost more than the current system, and we want more members involved, was the push behind why we were doing what we were doing. If it's okay, I mean, we can either Joan, if, with the Chair's permission, I'll look up the wording, or I can circulate it to you straight after. I can go and find it, but I haven't got it on top of my head. It's up to you.
Councillor Garton, while Andrew's looking through the oracle.
Yes, sending out the principles right away would be obviously an ideal solution. And since this review will not be ready for the next Democracy Committee, maybe we could make an agenda item about reviewing these principles at the next committee.
I think that's actually quite a good point. You know, within a review, if you see what I mean. No, I'm happy with that. Well, yeah, indeed. In fact, I think that's good. So, can we come up with the recommendation at this precise moment?
Sorry. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for your patience. Something so simple, really. That a scoping report is brought to the next committee meeting, setting out a review of the committee system, and that will include the original principles for discussion and agreement by this committee. Is that okay? Thank you.
That doesn't necessarily commit us to actually doing a review, though, does it? I think there should be a second resolution, or whether it's a second resolution or an additional, which says that a review will be carried out into the functions and responsibilities of each council committee, excluding regulatory committees.
Sorry, it's a bit painful. Right, so the first recommendation is a review be carried out into the functions and terms of reference of all the committees, excluding regulatory committees. The second part is that a scoping report be brought to the next committee meeting, setting out the review, including the original principles for agreement by this committee.
Right. Everybody, I trust, has understood that. So can we take a vote on it? Can we? Yeah. Is that seconded? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Can we take a vote on that, please? Those for. Those against? None. Any abstentions? One. Okay, thank you very much. That recommendation is made. Yes. Yeah. So item 14 is irrelevant. Right, I think we can go back to...
It automatically falls because it is because the motion we have just passed excludes consideration of that item tonight. But what we have to do is for the chairman to announce that it automatically has fallen. In other words, it's deferred until after the review has been carried out.
Right, so on item 14 on the agenda, which is the Economic Development Committee, where Mrs Woodhouse was going to present this item, it is actually deferred. Can we take a vote on that? No, that's all right, don't worry. It's deferred.
It's implicit in the earlier statement, that the earlier decision, that it would be discussed as part of the scoping review that's being carried out. And If you need a wording, Mr Chairman, I would suggest that you just say that the item is deferred and will be considered as part of the ongoing review that is to take place, or wording to that effect.
You need to announce to the committee.
Yeah, just to put the record straight here, item 14 is being deferred and will come back as part of the review. Are we agreed with that? Okay, it's unanimous. Any against that? No. I'm going to ask Patricia Narabord to present this item number 11 on the agenda. Thank you.
Chair, item number 11, page 5 of your agenda pack. This report is asking the committee to note the contents of the report. which relates to revision of the scheme of delegations in relation to a number of services. It really merely reflects changes to the head of Environment and Public Realm and the head of Regeneration and Economic Development, the head of Housing and Community Services. Those are the services where restructures have taken place in a number of services, and therefore the scheme of delegations need to be adjusted. I do need to revise the delegations using the monitoring officer's delegation because it's merely operational matters. It's so that the scheme of delegations are in line with how officers are, the structure of the services. Teams have moved around, so we need to make adjustments to the scheme of delegation.
Thank you very much. Councillor English, you...
As the legal officer quite correctly said, this is really essentially a matter of housekeeping, therefore I move the recommendation.
Thank you, and that seconded. Was it Councillor Garton, I think, seconded it? Do you wish to speak? Oh, Councillor Perry, sorry. Do you wish to speak? No. Okay, can we take a vote on that? It has to be, actually, it's to be noted, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I've got just one question here, because I think there's some sort of, whether it's a misprint, whether it should have been struck out rather than retyped. Page 39, item 53, seems to be identical with page 37, or the capital 9, which is item 12. Inspection of the authorities' area to detect any statutory nuisance. Now, I believe one of them should have been struck out and the other one should have been typed.
Sorry? Yeah. Sorry, Chair. I have been informed that these statutory functions are undertaken by both services, and therefore the delegation is required to be allocated to both of these services. There are on occasions where the particular function that you've mentioned on page 11 of the agenda papers, page 39, the inspection of the authorities' area to detect any statutory nuisance and the investigation of any complaints as to the existence of a statutory nuisance. It may be that those functions may need to be discharged by two services. By all means, if I will review the matter further, if indeed it's only one service, then I can delete one of the paragraphs as appropriate if I'm authorised to, well, I mean, the report is for noting, so I can exercise some delegation to make minor amendments to the scheme of delegation.
Are members happy with that? Okay. That's, okay, thank you. Agreed?
So we've done that.
12 on the agenda. Appointment to an outside body. Which 16.
Page 16. Yeah. Page 16. So who's introducing it?
That's better? Okay. The report before you references the fact that Councillor Davies' term of office as a nominative trustee of the Maidstone Relief in Need Charities is due to expire at the end of this month. and Councillor Daly has indicated that he would be willing to serve a further term of office as a nominative trustee. The position has been advertised to all members, but we didn't actually receive any other nominations. Therefore, the recommendations on the paper is to reappoint Councillor Daly as a nominative trustee of the Maidstone Relief in Need charities.
Thank you. Councillor English, you signalled...
Just proposing the recommendation.
Councillor English proposed it. Councillor Perry
said, I'll second it.
Second it, okay. Councillor Hinder, you also, was that, you were happy to second it? Okay, then. That's fine. I just wondered whether you wanted to speak. So, can we take a vote on that? Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Daly is reappointed as a nominative trustee of Maidstone Relief in Need charities. He should have a long service record on that one. Okay, thank you. Councillor Atkins, this is your one of yours that you indicated you wish to speak upon. Thank you. Just 1 second. Would you like to sit down and let the officer speak first? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for letting me introduce it again. Sorry for the brevity of my speech for the last time. I'll slow it down this time for you, but luckily I've got less to say on this one. It's all in the papers. Again, trust you read them all. The proposal for the council to appoint honorary aldermen was put forward by Councillor Harper. If the committee are minded to approve the recommendation on the papers, the committee may wish to amend the proposed protocol for selecting honorary aldermen. The main area the committee may wish to amend is the selection criteria, as this is down to local interpretation. The legislation isn't specific on what they term as significant contribution. So it's up to you really to sort of mould that as you see fit. The current proposal on the papers is that honorary aldermen must have served 8 years in total on the authority and must be nominated by 5 currently serving members of the authority. This is at the suggestion of Councillor Harper, but it's worth noting that other authorities have much more stringent selection criteria for somebody to be appointed as an honorary alderman. The longest I've seen was another authority had a suggestion of 20 years, to serve 20 years in the council. So it's quite a long time. I'm not suggesting that necessarily, but it's up to you what you want to do with that. So there you go, it's in the papers, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions for me on it. Thank you.
Councillor Atkins, as a visiting member, would you like to address the committee?
Okay, hope it's worth the wait. I'll read what I've written here. Councillor Harper and his representative on Earth. Thanks for that one, Clive. We're grateful for the work put in by the officers in producing this report. Whilst it is true that the report was drafted at the request of Councillor Harper, he's asked me to point out that it doesn't really match his concept of the scheme. Read paragraph 1.7, he accepts it doesn't really matter where the Honours Board is located. Read paragraph 1.9, he accepts that a special meeting is more appropriate. What Councillor Harper finds unacceptable is that there should be a nomination process. His original proposal put to the officers was that there should be no criteria other than that a member should have served at least 8 years on the council. As he says, the danger with insisting on a nomination process with 5 councillors needed to nominate someone is it could become party political and could possibly mean that long-serving members of small groups or no group would never receive the recognition they deserve. A nomination process devalues the whole concept. This should be a reward for service to the local community rather than service to a political party. Furthermore, removing the requirement for a nomination process will also remove the need to have a meeting to carry out the nomination process. In para 1.11 of the report, it is stated that automatic recommendation could lead to a large number of ex-councillors becoming honorary aldermen. How many people retiring this May who are not former mayors will have served 8 years or 12 years? Not many, I suspect. And if the council introduces an option to decline the nomination, which is what I personally would do, despite the fact I will have served a total of 12 years at the end of my current 4-year term, this will reduce the numbers even further. I would therefore ask that the committee amend the terms in Appendix 1 by deleting the sentence "nominations for the appointment of an ex-member to become an honorary alderman" 5 current serving members. This to be replaced by wording along the lines of "any former member of the council who has served at least 8 years is automatically nominated to be an honorary alderman, subject to ratification at a council meeting especially convened for the purpose. Any ex-member nominated shall have the option to decline said nomination if they so desire." Right, I'm no legal expert, but I feel it may be necessary to somehow stipulate that only members who cease being members as at May 2018 and beyond qualify. Otherwise, there's a possibility that ex-members from long ago will consider that they too should be included. Finally, I've been asked to say that if this report goes through as written, we would be looking to have the requisite number of members to call it in for referral to full council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor English?
Of course, aldermen used to exist pre-1974, and essentially in those days it was a combination of processes combining long length of service and nomination. The only place in local government in England, well, in Britain, where there are still aldermen, are, of course, in the City of London, which has its own electoral laws. In terms of honorary aldermen, there are also, which many authorities have adopted to try and keep traditions alive and to actually have a certain recognition for those who, for whatever reason, didn't become mayor or whatever, take many forms. Kent County Council has had a honorary alderman policy for quite a long time. There doesn't seem to have been any great difficulty with the operation of that system, but it does have a rather steeper, shall we say, qualification. I think if there isn't a nomination process, I think 8 years is far too short, because I mean we would have a significant number of so many aldermen that the whole concept becomes rather, we've run out of board space remarkably quickly. So I think it would need to be a much longer period if there isn't a nomination process. And I think we also have to be very careful about how we write any ex-member who isn't a councillor anymore, who's done the requisite term. I have to bear in mind there are some reasons why someone might be an ex-councillor that you certainly wouldn't want to celebrate. I won't go into who, but there are 1 or 2 former long-serving members of local authorities in Kent who are no longer councillors because of criminal convictions that carried more than a 6-month custodial sentence, even if in some cases they were conditional discharges. But they ceased to be councillors because they committed criminal offences. The wording that Councillor Atkinson has suggested would leave it open for those people to become honorary aldermen, which would, of course, completely devalue the process. So there has to be some sort of sieve, even if it's at a really basic level. And because otherwise we do lay ourselves open to actually be rewarding people who are frankly not the sort of people one should be acknowledging and rewarding. So, but in principle, it's a very good idea, and I think that we should be doing this. But I think we do need a much longer period than at least 3 terms of office. I think 12 years, 3 terms would be reasonable. And I think whilst a nomination criteria should be, you know, we've got to be careful about that. But in this council, we have, in various shapes and forms, in dealing with how the morality has been appointed, which we have, in whatever shape or form that's been done, managed to avoid politicising that office, and we have actually managed to have processes where there has been a filter system at various times. Currently, we have a seniority system, but at the end of the day, if someone was really, really, really unsuitable for that post as mayor, there would still be an option not to proceed with that appointment. It could happen. And some councils have actually, you know, not asked, we've never done it, but other councils in Kent have removed a mayor for not doing the job properly and conduct unbecoming. But you need to have a situation where there is some filters, even if it's very basic. And I don't think it's beyond our wit to come up with a system that is fundamentally going to do that, but is not partisan.
Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually agree with you, Clive. I think 8 years is far too short. And to me, to be an alderman, you've got to be a notable alderman. You need to have actually achieved something, not just being a councillor and just done very little. You have to have something behind you that gives you credit to what you've done. I think to have it to have it done, you've been a councillor, you're automatically going to be an alderman. I would strongly disagree with that. That is not my idea of aldermen whatsoever. I totally agree with Clive's thoughts on this. However, I do think 8 years is far too short. I think it should be 12 years, even 16 years, so that it actually gives some meaning to being an alderman. I think KCC, as you say, Clive, they still have it, but it's, like you say, it's honorary alderman. And maybe that's something we could look at here.
Looking for here, I mean, we can't, but, you know, the criteria we're looking at in the recommendation, apart from a very short 8 years, is not dissimilar from what many other councils do.
Councillor Perry, you signalled to speak. Yep.
Yes, well, I mean, the basic idea is a great one, and I think it's a very nice idea. I think you need some criteria. The nomination system of 5 seems to be all right by me, because if you just made it automatic, whatever period, it kind of cheapens it a bit, and that would not, I think, not work. So whether it's 8 or 12, I don't mind particularly. I would say in the modern world, 8 years is actually quite a long time, and I mean, the President of the United States only serves 8 years, so you could argue, I'm not relating this to that, but so, you know, it's not that short time. So I was happy with the 2 full terms, but if the general mood is to make it longer, I certainly wouldn't die in a ditch on that one. But I do think there needs to be a nomination, and obviously the filter system that Councillor English is referring to seems to be absolutely correct. So I'm in favour of it in principle. I think it's a great idea, but I wouldn't want it just without the nomination procedure. I think that's correct. And we have, as you quite rightly say, filters to ensure that it's not politically biased, and I think that works very well with the mayor system. So I think that would be right. Thank you.
Can I make a suggestion here? Because a few years ago, this committee reviewed the mayoralty in Maidstone, and I would like to suggest that perhaps we should consider, the committee should consider, a review of how this works. As a principle, we form a review committee for the introduction of an alderman and the necessary technology that goes with it, or, you know, a criterion that goes with that position. That's just my suggestion. Councillor Borton, you signalled.
Yes, I'd be interested to see what other members say about that. I was going to suggest, to beef up what Councillor Perry had suggested, there's actually... Look, I agree with in principle, I agree it should be longer than this, perhaps 12 or certainly 16 seems appropriate. But in order to take the political aspect that Councillor English was concerned about out of it, obviously you have to have nominations by 5 current serving members, perhaps, and if we're going to proceed with a working group, this is something that the working group could consider, that be 5 current serving members who aren't all of the same party, because you could get a group of 6, all of whom who fit the criteria and haven't been mayor, who all go and nominate each other. In theory, I'm not saying that has happened in practice, but you could get that in theory. But if we're going to go with a working group, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not sure at the moment precisely what we're asking that working group to do, then this would be one of the things to consider.
Councillor Garden.
Well, the point raised at 1.11 that a large amount of aldermen will lead to us running out of wall space, and civic events we would have to have too many invitations. I think these are arguments which I could not subscribe to. I mean, the easy ways to find wall space, or one could make a book or something like that. And at civic events, I think we sometimes have even problems to find enough sitting councillors who attend these events. So I don't think that is a major problem. The visiting member made some point about an unfairness, or about that this system should only start from 2018 onwards. And I think we see a little bit of an unfairness because there have been plenty of former members who served more than 8, 12 or even 16 years and who would be precluded from this. So maybe we should, if it becomes some sort of an automatic system or a system by nomination, that we could possibly make it to any still living former councillor to include them as well. That, as a matter of fairness, would be far more appropriate. Otherwise, I find this recommendation in principle quite commendable.
Sorry, I missed you. It's Councillor Fissenden, please.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, actually, it's not. I just want to ask a question, actually. Honorary Alderman. Is there an honorary alderwoman? It does say it. Where does it say that? On page? In brackets. Woman. Should be slash. Thank you. That was all I just wanted to know.
Okay, no, they exist. Right, let's have a look at the...
Essentially, I think we probably, there is a reasonable degree of consensus here, unless there's a massive amount of things that are undetermined. I don't really think there's a huge amount of work to be done. I think most of us think it probably should be a longer term, that there is a need for a nomination process, that there probably should be requirements that those, at least that should be cross-party in terms of the nomination. I'm not sure what else is needed.
The principle...
That's what I'm asking. What else do we need?
The principle of this suggestion has obviously been raised by Councillor Harper, and I think generally there's a consensus of support for it. But I think, as we did with the review of the mayoralty, I think the way forward would be to set up a working party, if somebody's happy to recommend that, to actually work out the nuts and bolts of this particular
I just want to know, before we do that, what it is that we're actually trying to establish, because as far as I can see, there isn't very much that needs to be further established, but I just want to be sure what else it is we need to put in that, because I think we could actually more or less agree with this.
Councillor Hinder.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what the criteria would be, or are you suggesting everybody goes on to be... I don't think that would be right. So I think there's got to be a certain criteria, Clive, and that's why I think if we had a working group, we could actually ask the officer to bring us certain reasons that, you know, or good things that we would suggest them being an honorary alderman. That's what I thought, maybe we could thrash it out in a working group.
Unless there's something other than a nomination procedure for what is in the view of the nominating councillors, particularly meritorious or outstanding service to the council and the public, what else is there? That's what I want to know, because personally I think we could... I mean, I'm not against necessarily having a very short meeting to discuss it, but what I would suggest is that agreeing this in principle and then having a further report back to the next meeting of this committee on how the criteria will work, rather than having a working group, because I don't think we need that. I think it's very simple.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Nearly agreed with everything Councillor English said, but not quite. I think the way forward, I think we can agree this in principle tonight. I agree with that, provided the committee votes for it. The question is then, what we're talking about is how to get in a position so that at the next meeting we have had the ability to thrash out the issues that have been raised tonight and get in front of us. Now, I think working group might be taking it too far, but I think in essence what it needs, Mr. Chairman, is probably a meeting outside of a formal meeting of this committee or representatives of this committee, just to sort of thrash out and to be able to do a bit of research in advance and so on and so forth, the issues which have been raised tonight over the criteria for which it's selected. And then come back to the next meeting in this committee. That's working group, if you want to call it that, but I don't think that's the right thing. We'll have more, but we'll have more information, and then we'll hopefully be able to agree it's from there. Does that make sense? Is that sort of a useful way forward?
I'll second that proposal, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Garton, before I go to the vote.
That's fine.
I mean, it all needs all we could do. I mean, we could do it tonight. All we need is a list of bullet points, length of term. Do we include former members, or only current members, only live members, or also deceased members, etc.? Make a list of bullet points, and then we just round the table, just vote on that. Yes, no. I mean, and the greater the forum, the more representative the vote on the bullet point list would be. So a working group of 2 or 3 members would probably not be very representative.
Councillor Perry.
One rule of thumb I've always had, particularly in international meetings, drafting on the hoof is not a great idea. And so I like this a little bit. Let's slow down. We're all in agreement, so it's just we can sort this out just a little bit. And I think I understand where you're coming from, but I think we should just take a bit of a breath and sort it. We can do it at the next meeting. I mean, I'm sure.
Okay. So, Councillor Fissenden.
I think it's quite interesting that if you actually Google it, what all the other councils have done. And, for example, how many years they've made and why, and whether it's gone to full council or not.
Shall I expand on the microphone, Mr. Chairman? I think what I suggested earlier, it seems to have some support, so I'll formally propose that. that we have one meeting, and all the issues that Councillor Garson has discussed, that Councillor Fissenden has just raised, that everything to do with the criteria of regarding the appointments of honorary older men and honorary older women be up for discussion and debate at that meeting. And we come back to the next meeting of the Democracy Committee with a firm recommendation on the criteria for selection.
Anybody prepared to second that?
Yes, I'll second that.
So can we take a vote on that, please? Okay, those for? Right, I'll formally close the meeting at 7:45. Thank you.